Hey everyone, I just wrapped up an amazing hour and a half long segment with Joanna Kujawa. We talked about everything, a lot of stuff.
Okay, so what is divine feminine? Divine feminine is basically the feminine aspect of the divine. I don't like anymore to use the terminology such as God. That's why I prefer to say divine, because God in Western religions such as Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are usually perceived as masculine only, right? So that's why I prefer to say the divine rather than God. And in this, in Western traditions, God is basically, and the way I experience it, is basically designed as this judgmental father figure and solely masculine, but nothing in nature exists that without polarity between masculine and feminine. So obviously this feminine element was lacking there. And interestingly enough, if you read biblical scholars, you realize that the feminine was present even in those religions and gradually was edited out. So it's very naive to believe that, the so-called original scripture, that it was written the way it was present at the moment. It is at the moment the way we read it. Because scholars such as, for example, Margaret Barker from Cambridge, she can go even to Jewish scriptures, Christian scriptures, and she says, there was a feminine here and that was edited out. She also does some linguistic studies around it, and she says that the misogynist kind of statement, the statements about women in the scriptures are actually relatively recent additions.
How do you know that? How do you know that it's relatively recent?
Because of the linguistic analysis. So, for example, some parts of the scripture are written in a much more ancient language, grammatically and so on, expressions and phrases. And then there is this kind of, addition that is somehow misogynistic or demeaning of women, and it is in a completely different language, meaning a language like people get evolves, right? So you can see that this is like for example, a more recent version of Hebrew or Latin or, Greek.
It's like Shakespeare is writing his sonnet, and all of a sudden
it's like Shakespeare and
Kanye West comes in and he adds a line in,
like
so you know.
If somebody, you read Shakespeare and suddenly Macbeth says, yo, mama, this is not... but it's a recent edition. So it's something like that. So this is something like that. So I went to study different traditions, and for example, when I studied Hinduism, I realized that they have this wonderful polarity between Shiva and Shakti. Shiva is the masculine element of the divine, Shakti is the feminine element of the divine, and they are in perfect harmony. They have different kind of powers and positions, but they are basically working in a complete unity. So in other religions, this kind of thing is present. And then I started to study pre-Christian, pre-Judaic kind of religions, especially from the Middle East. And I discovered goddesses such as Nimna, Inanna, Ishtar, Isis, which is Egyptian, but Nimna, Inanna, and Ishtar are from the Middle East, from ancient culture of Sumer, which is now where Iraq is right now, which were very powerful goddesses, very powerful feminine presence, along with the gods, and perhaps even more powerful than gods, which represent many kind of archetypes, divine feminine. Not only the mother, as it is present on nowadays, but also as a warrior, as a virgin, as a seductress, anything you want, and also as wisdom.
Joanna, in those cultures that had these goddesses that were really, really powerful, is there any evidence that the women were treated with the same sort of reverence and respect? I mean, do we have any sort of parallels between the goddesses and the women?
That's a very interesting question, because really, like when we look, for example, into Hinduism, there are all of these wonderful goddesses, but women are not being treated equally, right?
Right.
Like in India, there is lots of, inequality. That's a well-known fact. But it's also very difficult to say in ancient cultures whether this equality was present, because However, we know, for example, that when we talk about Sumer, which is 7,000 years old culture, there was this high priestess who wrote beautiful poems for the goddess Inanna, and in modern language you could say she published her poems. She was a high priestess, she was the head of a temple, and she was performing all kinds of rituals. She was a noble woman because she was the daughter of the king, so I don't know whether her power was coming from her social status or from the fact that she was a priestess. However, she was a high priestess. In the West nowadays, Middle East or in Europe, we really don't have high priestesses.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So there we had a woman who was a high priestess who wrote these beautiful sensual poems, about goddess Inanna and the goddess's consort, male consort Dumuzi, very sensual. And it's also very interesting because sensuality and sexuality was also considered sacred. And it's quite interesting that in those temples, the priestesses were performing sexual rituals with a chosen young man to ensure that the crops were fertile. So the priestesses were choosing their consorts, so to speak. So obviously there was some free, but we only know bits and pieces. So I wouldn't presume to say that women were equal in Sumer. But there are some indications that at least priestesses had some power, and there was a status of a high priestess, somebody who was a head of a temple. Okay, that's a very difficult question because as an international person and an outsider to America, I must say that I am observing events in America of great horror. And this is I'm not here to insult anybody, but I think that it's almost some kind of pressure cooker, like everything is so polarized, terribly polarized. The best description I think I found in Eckhart Tolle, actually, who was talking about he calls it body pain, but I actually would call it emotional pain. He says that women carry in them this kind of pain of abuse that happened throughout the millennia. And we carry this emotional pain with the pain that is associated with the abuse that we have encountered for millennia now, right? With this concept of this just a masculine God and, the misogyny that happens in religion and it spills over to economy and politics and so on. And that's why, I think there is, if we talk about the movement, I think that this pain is very much kind of erupting there, right? Women want to speak up about this pain. But at the same time, I think that we have to be very careful. In some ways, spirituality is never about revenge. That we cannot always put ourselves in a kind of position of victimhood, and we have to get empowered. This is what I'm trying to say. So we have to get beyond and above just accusation, but we have to stand in our own power. But we have to move away from this polarity of accusation, but rather develop our own power independent of men.
I hear that. I hear women saying that, we have to be powerful. And in my personal opinion, I feel like not only do we not understand as a society, obviously there's exceptions, but as a society, not only do we not understand what masculine feminine is right now, but we have this corrupted idea of power as well, as power as not being an energy that is innate and complementary, but a very possessive energy, a very dark energy. So how do you define power? How do you encourage someone to stand in their power?
I think, and it may sound a little bit contradictory, but I think through compassion, actually. Through compassion, we are all kind of flawed beings. So although we have to acknowledge all the abuse that happened, we also have to move beyond it. We cannot stick or hold on to our own pain, so to speak. So I think what's happening right now with the Me Too movement is we're acknowledging this pain, and this is this kind of eruption of rage but I really hope that it will also pass away, that we are not going to focus on this completely, that basically we are going to forgive each other and move on together, so to speak, into the future. Because as you rightly said, power is very kind of a divisive concept at that moment. And I still believe that it comes, going back to what I said, this definition of this kind of patriarchal God, it still comes from there, because this is kind of like God on testosterone, but completely represses the feminine.
Yeah. And you take it back into the theological space, you see exactly that playing out. Why aren't women speaking out? Why are the men toxic towards the women? Why is there a wall between the men and women? All of the questions that get raised essentially come down to exactly what you're saying, this mindset of what it means to be a man and this mindset of what it means to be a woman. And so in my mind, then, the solution would be to deconstruct the issues that we're having within this theological space of alienation and belonging. You have to kind of come back to, well, what does it even mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a woman?
Because in Gnostic Gospels, such as the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, for example, Mary Magdalene, who is portrayed in the Orthodox Bible, which wasn't created until 4th century, so 4 centuries after Jesus died. So as people say, nobody knows what Jesus said. We just know what people think Jesus said, right? Because he didn't write anything. She's portrayed as a prostitute. In the rejected Gospels, she is the major disciple of Jesus. In the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, in another Gnostic source, Pistis Sophia, she asks most of the questions. And all the male disciples get upset. Why is she this woman? Why is she asking all of these questions? She has no place here. And Jesus tells them, she's imbued with the Spirit. Let her talk. He basically gives her preference over and over again. And in the Gospel of Philip, another rejected Gospel, Mary Magdalene is called the consort of Jesus, or the wife of Jesus, So again, we have this polarity, and this is, and there's this feminine presence in Jesus' life, because obviously in the Bible, everybody's obsessed with Jesus being a virgin and not having a female partner and so on.
So very much like the Da Vinci Code.
That's right. And I thought, like, gee, that's really cool. Like this woman that was completely degraded in the Bible, which, by the way, when I started to do research, why is such a discrepancy between Mary Magdalene in the Bible and Mary Magdalene in the rejected Gospels, I learned that the Catholic Church in 1969 quietly admitted that there is no evidence in the Bible that she was a prostitute. But who knows it but scholars?
Wow. 1969, okay. That's still really 1969, recent.
So it's not nonsense. They admitted that in the 6th century, Pope Gregory, one of the popes, made a scriptural mistake, by confusing her with another woman in the Bible. I'm not going to get into this kind of scriptural, she said, he said, but basically he made a mistake, or maybe he was misogynist, or whatever his problem was, he made a mistake. So, and then, talking about feminine divine, I started to look, wow, where are the examples of the divine feminine before Mary Magdalene, which were both, and my 2 favorite qualities of the divine feminine, smart and sexy? Because I was not interested in Virgin Mary, because I thought this is a male fantasy, this kind of all-forgiving mother that only a guy would come up with, you know what I mean? Because she's so non-threatening. And, she had a baby, but she's still a virgin, and like, what?
I never thought of it that way, but yeah.
So I thought, I want another goddess, full-on goddess, that is both smart and sexy, because this is what, like a full-blooded goddess. This is what I want. And I started to look into, like, pre-Judaic, pre-Christian goddesses from the Middle East, and I found Nimna, I found Inanna, I found Ishtar, and found Isis. And all of them, and I will be talking about it, as you know, tomorrow on my own event, all of them actually, I believe, one and the same goddess, which keeps rebirthing herself in our consciousness, because she has some message for us. Because in each instance, she's a goddess, she's all-powerful, she's a goddess of wisdom, she has a male consort whom she resurrects. Actually, two things. Very modern kind of archetype of a divine feminine for us. As I said, somebody, as I said, is both smart, sexy, and highly spiritually evolved. You know, so, but at the same time, I just want to say that as I was looking at this progression of goddesses, which I believe it's the same goddess, all of these goddesses that I mentioned, it's the same goddess, her power through the centuries and through millennia is being diminished. So she's become, even in Gnostic Gospels, which portrayed her in a more positive way, she is the disciple of Jesus. But in previous in previous incarnations, such as like Inanna, for example, or Isis, or Ishtar, she is the main goddess who gives teachings. So she has a male consort, but she is the main deity. So you see, like, so her power was gradually diminished. So even in Gnostic Gospels, when she's much more powerful when in the Bible, she's now the disciple. When before she was the main goddess, and she just happened to have a male consort, whom, however, she also managed to resurrect it and give him an eternal life. Now she's just only present when he's resurrected.
For anyone who's listening to this and thinking, what does talking about goddesses have to do with mosques and Islam and Muslim women? There you go. How did you have these incredibly powerful figures? And so when we were speaking earlier, I was telling you about the three goddesses in the Quran. They were the moon goddesses, and they are mentioned. So it is a revelation that Prophet Muhammad received. And after it came to light that these are actually the moon goddesses that he's given this platform to, you can't obviously edit that out once it's been discovered. So the ruling theory is that he was it was a demonic influence. And so there's so many problems with that. So, I mean, right? There's so many problems with that because, first of all, you have the three powerful women scrubbed, who were on level with God at the time, scrubbed, right? Now, whether or not they were, whether we're going to support polytheism, that's not the point. The point is you have these female figures, and once there is objection to them, they're scrubbed, and then they could only exist if it was that much of a dark demonic influence, which is how essentially, women are seen in these systems. So again, back to the answer of what does the goddess have to do with the larger theme of this Patreon page, it's, if you're wondering why does a mosque have, they have different entrances for men and women, or not entrances, but different rooms for men and women. And I've been in those rooms. I've been in mosques where, you're here and the men are here and you don't even have access to what's going on. This is not something that happens overnight, because even if you look at the Islamic religion, and again, we're not going to get into religion, but any system that we look at has evolved. There's this wonderful book that I keep referencing, God is Not One, and it goes into the history, and I'm sure you know all about this, but it goes into the history of how the predominant interpretation of God as the masculine, this one solitary figure, how that came into play. And it was always politics. Politics always drove how people saw a deity, and it shaped what was most useful for that time. So that's how we get to where we are today. Gosh, okay. That's a lot.
If I could just I cannot comment on Islam because I'm not an Islamic scholar, but basically, generally, why women are being discounted from religions, all the traditional religions. And I would say that we shouldn't think about polytheism, because you mentioned monotheism versus polytheism. By bringing back the goddess, I don't want to introduce polytheism. What I'm saying, God or the divine is bigger than gender. It's neither masculine, it's not or feminine. It's both and more.
I love that.
Right?
I love that.
It's both and more. So we are talking about aspects of the divine, not whether, the God is a boy or a girl. I mean, we are demeaning God. We are demeaning divine by saying, it looks like that. No, it's actually blonde, and has a red lipstick, No, we are talking about aspect. This is a very low level thinking.
Yeah.
When we are talking about God, about divine, we have to live up to a higher level thinking, which is basically we're talking about the aspects of divinity. And what are the feminine aspects of divinity? It's compassion, it's love, it's peace. God without it is a warrior god, you know, and that's why we have all of this conflict in the world, because the feminine aspect of the divine is being repressed or at least suppressed gradually. And if there is anything feminine mentioned about the divine, it's considered, you know, dark or sinful or demonic. And also, I think that the source or the God or divine, because I prefer calling God by the source, capital S, or the divine, is pure. But when the message is transmitted, let's put it this way, into a human mind, the human mind will interpret it in its own limited way. And who was in power recently, you know, for last 3,000-4,000 years?
Right.
You know, the masculine, right? So they say, oh, no. You know, the same like we happen with Gnostic Gospels, because we say how it relates to Islam. Oh, no, Jesus couldn't say it, but, you know, women are equal. Because, you know, women are not, you know, because they're just limited by their own thinking. So it's not the divine is at fault. It is that human mind interprets it what it suits them, and sometimes to their own political and economic or particular social group and their power. So I think that calling God masculine and feminine, we are just demeaning God. You know, as I said, I believe the divine is way beyond it, and we are just talking about certain qualities of the divine.
I mean,
and the qualities that we desperately need, such as like interconnectivity, love, compassion, which are feminine qualities. Say something when you're talking about this duality. I don't really mean duality. That's why I said like different aspects of the divine. And also when you talk about the polarity about masculine and feminine, I would like to bring up a Swiss psychoanalyst, Carl Jung, because he said something interesting about feminine and masculine. He said that both women and men have masculine and feminine in them. So he said animus is the masculine, anima is the feminine. And both women and men have both animus and anima. It's just to a different degree. Right?
Yeah.
So basically, even we are like internally divided, but it's not. It's actually one wholeness, one unity.
Different aspects of the same unity.
Even us, that's right. So we are basically a mirror of the divine. So it's not really dualism. It's a unity. It's just, you know, that there are different aspects to that.
And this is a crisis point. And a crisis point is really, really important, because that's an opportunity to say, hey, wake up. You know, what are we going to do about it? And so when we look at that, when we look at the religious issues around some of the stuff that we talked about today, when we look at the sort of breakdown of the feminine, the masculine, and understanding what that means, all of these are just a lot of seismic crisis points that give us a chance to say, we got to wake up and we got to do something differently. And this is why I'm really glad I got to talk to you today, because you have so much wisdom and insight into understanding the fundamentals of, you know, where is this coming from, because this isn't something that started last week or last year, or with, let's say, a Trump presidency, or, you know, this war, that war. This is human history playing out, and it goes back to day one. So I really appreciate your insight and connecting the dots for us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure talking to you.
It was such a blast. I'm going to have you on again. We're going to find something else to talk about.